Evelyn Thorne, 33 years old, and somehow still dealing with the people who stole my life. At a massive corporate gala, I ran into my ex-fiancé and my former best friend. He waved his VIP pass in my face like a trophy. "You were not invited," he smirked, looking me up and down. I did not argue, I just handed my solid black metal invitation to the receptionist. She scanned the chemical compound, froze completely, and frantically grabbed her radio to call the billionaire chairman of the event. "Sir," she gasped, "she is here. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had the ultimate revenge on people who tried to destroy your future." The grand lobby of the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom hummed with the quiet, expensive energy of the corporate elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the polished marble floors, illuminating the hundreds of executives gathered for the tech industry event of the year. I stood near the entrance, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored charcoal suit. It was deliberately unbranded, devoid of any flashy logos or ostentatious displays of wealth. I preferred flying under the radar. Being invisible makes the eventual execution so much sweeter. Tonight was the night Apex Biomed was scheduled to acquire a rising biotech startup for $150 million. What nobody in that glittering, crowded room knew was that I held the strings to the entire operation. I was savoring the quiet anticipation when the harsh nasal laugh of a woman cut through the ambient noise of clinking champagne glasses. I turned slowly and saw them, Arthur and Clara. 4 years ago, Arthur was the man I was going to marry. We built a startup together from the ground up in a tiny, cramped garage. I wrote the core algorithm, pouring my sweat, tears, and intellect into the chemical compound while he handled the external sales pitches. Then he stole my intellectual property, pushed me out of my own company through a massive legal loophole, and took my best friend Clara with him. She was supposed to be my maid of honor. Instead, she became his wife. Now they were walking toward me like royalty. Arthur wore a custom velvet suit that screamed new money and desperation. Clara clung tightly to his arm, draped in a heavily sequenced silk gown and dripping with diamonds. The irony was not lost on me. Every jewel on her neck, every stitch of clothing they wore was bought with my stolen equity. Arthur spotted me standing near the velvet security ropes, and his confident stride faltered for a fraction of a second. His eyes widened in genuine shock before his face twisted into a smug, victorious grin. He practically dragged Clara over to me, eager to display his dominance. "Well, look who decided to crawl out of the woodwork." Arthur sneered loudly, drawing the attention of a few nearby investors. "Did you get lost on your way to a temp agency, Thorne? Or are you here to serve drinks?" Clara giggled a high and grating sound that made my jaw clench. She looked me up and down, her eyes stopping mockingly at my plain suit. "Oh, Arthur, leave her alone. Look at her outfit, not even a single designer label. It is honestly just sad. You would think, after 4 years, she would have figured out how to dress for a high society venue." I looked at them, taking in their arrogant posture and their hollow, fragile confidence. I did not yell, I did not defend myself. Reacting emotionally is exactly what they wanted. It was the same exact tactic they used 4 years ago to paint me as unstable, so they could justify stealing my company. Instead, I maintained absolute unwavering eye contact and offered a slow, chilling smile. My total silence seemed to unnerve Arthur. He puffed out his chest, his face flushing red, and grabbed the heavy gold VIP lanyard hanging around his neck. He shook the pass in front of my face like a toy. "This is a closed corporate event, Thorne. Tonight, my company is being acquired for $150 million. I am the guest of honor. You were not invited. If you take one single step toward that ballroom, I will personally have security throw you out on the street where you belong." I stepped around him without uttering a single word. The main check-in desk was flanked by 2 massive security guards. The receptionist, a young woman visibly overwhelmed by the constant stream of demanding tech executives, looked up as I approached. Arthur and Clara followed right behind me, practically vibrating with excitement as they eagerly waited for my public humiliation. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a solid black tungsten card. There was no name printed on it, no company logo, only an embedded gold microchip. I placed the heavy mail card onto the marble counter. It landed with a solid thud. The receptionist picked it up with a polite but highly dismissive smile. "I am sorry, ma'am, but if you do not have a registered QR chemical compound on your phone, I cannot let you inside." Her voice completely died in her throat as she tapped the heavy card against the scanner. The computer screen did not just flash green to grant entry. It flashed a solid glowing sequence with a security clearance level reserved exclusively for the absolute top of the corporate food chain. The screen proudly displayed the words "majority shareholder." The color completely drained from the receptionist's face. She stared at the monitor reading the classified designation, and then slowly raised her terrified eyes to look at me. Her hands began to shake violently. She dropped the tungsten card on the desk as if it physically burned her skin. Arthur crossed his arms and laughed a loud barking laugh. "See, I told you they are going to call the cops on you for trespassing. Get your phone out, Clara. I want a high-definition video of her getting dragged out of here." The receptionist ignored Arthur entirely. She lunged for her security radio, her fingers fumbling desperately with the call button. "Mr. Hastings," she gasped into the microphone, her voice trembling with sheer panic. "Sir, please come to the front desk immediately. She is here," Arthur smirked, looking incredibly proud of himself. "Wow, you really messed up this time, Thorne. Victor Sterling is the billionaire chairman of Apex Biomed. He is the man handing me a $150 million check tonight. When he sees a pathetic, jealous ex trying to crash his private event, he is going to absolutely ruin you." I kept my posture perfectly relaxed and composed. Arthur had absolutely no idea that Victor Sterling, the terrifying and ruthless titan of finance, only answered to one person in this world, and that person was standing right in front of him. I waited for Victor to emerge from the crowded, noisy ballroom. But before the silver-haired chairman could reach the front desk to properly greet me, a harsh, abrasive voice echoed across the marble floor from the opposite direction. It was a voice that immediately made my blood run cold. Heavy footsteps marched toward my position. My toxic blood relatives had spotted me, and they were charging forward, ready to deliver the next blow. "What are you doing here?" The sharp, heavily manicured fingers of my mother, Beatrice, dug instantly into my forearm. I did not flinch. I simply looked down at her hand until she uncomfortably released her grip. My father William and my older brother Julian flanked her like two utterly useless bodyguards. They all wore the same expression of panicked embarrassment, completely terrified that my mere presence would somehow ruin their proximity to wealth. "You need to leave right now." Beatrice hissed, her voice a frantic whisper meant to avoid drawing attention from the surrounding investors. "We told you specifically to stay away. Today is Arthur's big day. He is signing a $150 million deal, and the last thing he needs is you causing another one of your psychotic scenes." I smoothed the fabric of my sleeve exactly where her claws had just been. "A scene," I repeated softly. "You mean like the scene where I discovered my fiancé in bed with my best friend? Or the scene where my own family helped him steal my life's work?" My father stepped forward, his face turning a dark shade of red. He puffed out his chest, trying to project an authority he had not earned in decades. "You had a mental breakdown 4 years ago, Thorne. You were completely unstable. Arthur had every legal right to fire you from that startup. He built this tech company with his own 2 hands. You were just holding him back." The sheer audacity of the lie was almost breathtaking. I looked at William, the man who was supposed to protect me, and felt absolutely nothing but clinical disgust. "He built nothing," I stated, my voice dropping to a register so cold and authoritative that even Julian took a step back. "I wrote every single line of the proprietary genetic sequencing patent in our apartment while Arthur was out buying overpriced drinks on my credit card. He did not even know how to open a command terminal. He committed corporate espionage, stole my source chemical compound, and transferred the intellectual property to a newly formed LLC. And when I went to you for help, my own father, what did you do? William opened his mouth to argue, but I did not give him the chance to spin another lie. You gaslit me. I continued making direct eye contact with my parents. You and Beatrice cornered me in a hospital room after I collapsed from severe burnout. I was physically and mentally drained from synthesizing a platform that was ready for a Series A funding round. You manipulated me into signing a separation agreement and forfeiting my fully vested shares under the guise of keeping the peace. You convinced me that surrendering my equity was the only way to protect the family from a lengthy public legal battle. But we all know the real reason, do we not? I shifted my gaze to Julian, who was sweating visibly under the bright chandelier lights. Arthur promised you a seat on the board of directors, William, I said, laying the corporate reality bare. He bought your loyalty with a worthless title and a fraction of a percent in phantom equity. You traded your daughter's future so you could brag to your golf buddies about being a tech executive. Clara, sensing the shift in power, desperately grabbed Arthur's arm. Do not listen to her, babe. She is just a bitter unemployed dropout who cannot handle that we won. Julian finally found his voice, stepping up next to Arthur like a loyal lapdog. You heard her, Thorne. You are pathetic. Arthur is about to be a multi-millionaire, and you are crashing a corporate gala in a cheap suit just to beg for attention. Walk out that door before you embarrass yourself even more. I looked at my brother, 36 years old, utterly devoid of any actual business skills, currently wearing a suit I knew he had bought on a high-interest credit card. He was begging for scraps from the man who had ruined his sister. The pathetic nature of his existence was almost painful to witness. I am not the one who should be embarrassed, Julian, I said smoothly. You might want to check the fine print on that board seat, William was promised, or the Vice President of Human Resources title you have been begging Arthur to give you. Equity in a stolen company is still stolen property. Arthur's arrogant smirk returned in full force. He had realized that arguing with me was drawing the eyes of passing venture capitalists. He decided to play the powerful executive, shutting down a nuisance. This is completely ridiculous, Arthur announced loudly, ensuring his voice carried to the nearby check-in desk. I am not going to let a disgruntled ex-employee ruin the most important night of my career. He turned his back on me and raised his hand in the air, snapping his fingers toward the main entrance doors. Two security guards dressed in dark tactical suits immediately caught his signal. Arthur pointed a manicured finger at my chest. Gentlemen, Arthur commanded, his voice dripping with superiority. This woman is trespassing at a private corporate acquisition event. She has a documented history of severe mental instability and is currently harassing my family. Remove her from the premises immediately. Use physical force if you have to. Beatrice let out a dramatic sigh of relief, patting her perfectly styled hair. Thank goodness. Let the professionals handle her. William sneered at me one last time. You brought this on yourself, Thorne. You always do. The security guards marched forward, their heavy boots echoing on the polished marble floor. They flanked me on both sides, their expressions hard and unyielding. The taller of the two reached out his massive hands, preparing to grab my shoulders and physically drag me out of the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my public humiliation to reach its devastating climax. Arthur crossed his arms, his chest puffed out in total triumph, eagerly waiting for the show. Before the guard's heavy hand could clamp down on my shoulder, a sharp, commanding voice sliced through the heavy tension of the lobby. Do not even think about touching her. A figure stepped smoothly into the narrow space between me and the tactical security team. It was Olivia, my brother's wife. At 34 years old, Olivia was a striking African-American woman with a brilliant legal mind, currently wearing a tailored emerald pantsuit that made Clara's sequenced gown look like a cheap costume. Olivia had spent the last 4 years quietly observing the parasitic nature of the family she had married into, and clearly she had reached her absolute limit. She had built her own career in corporate auditing. She knew how to read a balance sheet, and more importantly, she knew how to read people. Olivia stood her ground, her posture immaculate, projecting an authority that made the two massive guards hesitate. She stared them down for a fraction of a second, before turning her lethal, unyielding gaze directly onto my brother and my mother. "She owns the original patent," Julian Olivia stated, her voice ringing out with crystal clarity. "Every single line of chemical compound, keeping that startup afloat, belongs to her." "Back off, both of you," Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her chest in theatrical outrage. "Olivia, what on earth is wrong with you? Whose side are you on? You are supposed to be supporting this family." Julian turned a violent shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his tightly knotted collar. He lunged forward, grabbing Olivia by the elbow and attempting to yank her out of the way. She yanked her arm back with equal force, her eyes flashing with pure warning. "Shut your mouth," Olivia, Julian hissed, his voice dropping into a vicious, controlling tone meant to intimidate her. "Know your place. You are embarrassing me in front of Arthur. Step out of the way right now, before you ruin my career." Olivia did not flinch. She simply looked at the man she had married with profound, icy disgust. "What career, Julian? You do not have a career. You are a glorified errand boy begging for handouts from a thief." Arthur, infuriated that his grand display of power was being interrupted by my sister-in-law, snapped his fingers at the security team again. He completely ignored Olivia's warning. "I do not care what his wife says," Arthur barked, his face twisting with arrogant impatience. "This woman is a security threat. I want her removed from the Waldorf Astoria right now." "Do your jobs." The guards, taking their direct orders from the VIP guest of honor, nodded in agreement. The taller guard stepped around Olivia, his massive hands lunging forward to grab me by the arms and physically drag me toward the revolving glass doors. I did not brace for impact. I did not step back. I kept my eyes locked on Arthur. I said, "Take your hands off her immediately." The command thundered across the marble floor. It was not a shout, but a booming, gravelly voice carrying the undeniable weight of absolute corporate authority. The crowd of wealthy investors parted like the Red Sea. Chairman Victor Sterling, a silver-haired titan of the financial industry, dressed in a bespoke Navy suit, marched directly into the center of the conflict. He did not ask for permission to intervene. He simply stepped forward and forcefully shoved the taller security guard's arm away from me. The guards froze instantly. Every single executive investor and hotel staff member in the lobby recognized the billionaire founder of Apex Biomed. The air in the room grew completely still. Arthur's face immediately lit up with an eager, fawning expression. He assumed Victor had rushed over to protect his $150 million investment from a crazy stalker. Arthur quickly stepped around my parents, smoothing his velvet jacket, and extended his hand toward the billionaire with a sickeningly sweet smile. "Victor, Sir Arthur," said his voice dripping with sycophantic charm. "I am so incredibly sorry about this minor disturbance. You did not need to come down here yourself. This unstable woman was just leaving. Security is handling it." Victor Sterling did not shake Arthur's hand. He did not even look at Arthur. He looked straight through him as if the man were completely invisible. The billionaire chairman adjusted his suit jacket, stepped squarely in front of me, and then did something that caused the entire lobby to stop breathing. Victor lowered his head and offered me a deep, respectful bow. "My deepest apologies for the wait, ma'am," Victor said, his tone entirely deferential. "The board of directors was reviewing the final restructuring protocols you requested for tonight's acquisition. We are fully prepared to proceed on your command." The silence that blanketed the lobby was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Arthur's eager smile shattered into a million pieces. His extended hand dropped awkwardly to his side, his jaw unhinged, his eyes darting frantically between my perfectly stoic face and the bowing billionaire. The cognitive dissonance was breaking his mind in real time. He tried to process what he was seeing, but his brain completely short-circuited. Clara let out a confused, high-pitched gasp, clutching her diamond necklace as if she were suddenly struggling for air. William and Beatrice stared at Victor with blank, uncomprehending expressions. Julian looked as though the floor had just dropped out from beneath him. The man holding the $150 million check, the ruthless titan of corporate acquisitions, the billionaire they had all been worshipping, had just bowed to the unemployed failure they discarded 4 years ago. Arthur swallowed hard, his face turning an ash and shade of gray as the horrifying reality began to set in. How on earth did I know the billionaire who was buying his company? For 3 agonizing seconds, Arthur stared at Victor's sterling, bowed head. You could practically hear the rusty gears turning inside his brain as his fragile ego desperately fought to reject the reality unfolding right in front of him. Narcissists possess a truly fascinating survival mechanism. When confronted with a truth that shatters their superiority, their brains instantly rewrite the narrative to protect their delusion. Arthur's breathing steadied, the color rushed back into his cheeks. He let out a sudden booming laugh that echoed awkwardly across the polished marble lobby. He clapped his hands together, his face twisting into an expression of patronizing amusement. "Oh, I get it now," Arthur announced, his voice dripping with loud condescension. "You are the event coordinator. Apex hired you to run the logistics for the gala tonight." Arthur turned to the crowd of gathered investors, grinning widely like a man who had just solved a simple riddle. "Of course, restructuring protocols. You mean the seating charts and the catering schedule?" "Wow, Thorne. I have to admit, organizing hotel banquets is definitely a step up from being unemployed." "Good for you." I did not correct him. I stood perfectly still, my expression an impenetrable mask of calm. Arthur grew bolder, fueled entirely by my silence. He actually stepped past me and clapped his hand heavily onto Victor Sterling's shoulder. It was a staggering display of disrespect, treating a 60-year-old financial titan like a fraternity brother at a sports bar. "Victor," Sir Arthur said, flashing his perfectly bleached teeth. "It is incredibly generous of Apex Biomed to hire struggling locals for these events. We love seeing corporate charity in action, but let us not waste your valuable time on the hired help. We have a $150 million acquisition to sign tonight, and I know you want to get the champagne flowing just as much as I do." Behind him, my family eagerly fed off his manufactured confidence. My brother Julian smirked, stepping forward to piggyback on Arthur's dominance. "Make sure my steak is cooked medium rare tonight, Thorne." Julian sneered, "And try not to drop any plates when the executives are talking." My mother, Beatrice, let out a dramatic sigh of relief, clearly thrilled that the narrative had been restored to her liking. "Just do your job quietly, Thorne, and please do not mess up the floral arrangements on our table. We have very important people to impress tonight." They were all so blinded by greed and their desperate need to feel superior that they completely ignored the glaring, undeniable reality right in front of them. Billionaires do not bow to party planners. Clara, emboldened by her husband's delusion, strutted forward. She smoothed the fabric of her sequined gown and stepped directly into my personal space. The scent of her expensive, overpowering perfume washed over me. She raised her left hand, deliberately, waving it directly in my line of sight. A massive, flawless diamond ring caught the light of the grand chandeliers. I recognized the exact valuation of that stone. It was purchased directly with the stolen capital from the Series seed funding round. That was capital generated exclusively by the machine learning algorithm I coded from scratch in a freezing cramped apartment, while Clara was pretending to be my supportive best friend. "It really is a shame," Thorne. Clara cooed, her voice laced with fake sympathy. "You were always so good at typing away in the dark, but you just never had the mindset for real business. Too bad you lacked the vision to scale the company. If you had just listened to Arthur 4 years ago, maybe you would not be stuck planning parties while we are cashing out for $150 million. I looked at the diamond ring, then slowly traced my gaze up into Clara's eyes. I did not blink. I did not show a single ounce of the rage they were so desperately trying to provoke. I simply let them dig their graves deeper, watching them shovel the dirt over their own heads with enthusiastic pride. My total stoicism seemed to infuriate Clara. She wanted me to scream, she wanted me to cry, to break down and to validate her victory. My silence was a titanium wall she could not break. Victor Sterling stood rigidly next to me. The Apex chairman was a man who routinely dismantled Fortune 500 companies before breakfast. He oversaw trillions in assets and commanded armies of corporate litigators. He watched Arthur's display of astronomical stupidity with a look of pure, unfiltered pity. It was the exact look a seasoned predator gives a very loud, very oblivious prey wandering into a trap. Victor slowly turned his head to look at Arthur's hand, which was still resting presumptuously on his expensive suit jacket. He did not shrug it off. He simply stared at the hand until Arthur, suddenly feeling the freezing temperature of the chairman's gaze, awkwardly pulled his fingers away and cleared his throat. Victor took a deep breath, his broad chest expanding as he prepared to speak. I knew exactly what he was about to do. He was opening his mouth to absolutely decimate Arthur's worldview, to strip away the pathetic delusion, and introduce my true corporate title to the entire lobby. He was going to end the game right here and now. I shifted my gaze to catch Victor's eye. Before a single syllable could leave the chairman's lips, I raised my right hand just a fraction of an inch and lifted a single finger. It was a subtle commanding gesture, a silent absolute order to stand down. Victor saw the movement, his jaw snapped shut instantly. He swallowed his words, gave a minuscule nod of obedience, and stepped back into a neutral, submissive posture. I lowered my hand, my face betraying absolutely nothing. Let them play. The higher they climb their imaginary pedestal tonight, the harder they will hit the concrete when I pull the financial foundation out from under them. Arthur turned on his heel, dismissing me entirely, and led his entourage toward the frosted glass doors of the VIP cocktail lounge. Clara clung to him, casting one final triumphant glance over her shoulder. My parents and Julian trailed behind them like eager ducklings, hoping for breadcrumbs. I watched them disappear into the exclusive enclave, their loud laughter cutting through the sophisticated hum of the lobby. Victor stood perfectly still beside me, waiting for my instruction. Proceed with the schedule, I told him, keeping my voice low. Make them comfortable, let them drink the most expensive champagne you have. I want them feeling completely invincible when the floor drops. Victor gave a crisp nod, his eyes gleaming with the predatory anticipation of a veteran corporate raider. He turned and marched toward the main ballroom to prepare the slaughter. I adjusted my jacket and quietly slipped into the VIP lounge. Sticking to the dimly lit perimeter, the VIP lounge was a masterclass in calculated opulence. Dark mahogany walls absorbed the ambient light while a live jazz quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets circulated with trays of caviar and crystal flutes. I found a strategic vantage point behind a massive marble pillar draped in shadows. It provided a perfect unobstructed view of Arthur's semi-private booth. I stood perfectly still, letting the darkness conceal me, and watched the pathetic display of my so-called family. William and Beatrice were practically vibrating with desperation. They leaned across the leather seating, hanging on to Arthur's every word, as if he were a prophet delivering divine truth. Beatrice kept reaching out to touch Clara's arm, complimenting her dress, her hair, her jewelry, completely debasing herself for a scrap of validation. William was no better. My father, a man who had spent his entire life demanding respect and absolute obedience from his children, was currently refilling Arthur's glass, acting as a glorified butler for the man who had ruined his daughter. It was a sickening, fascinating study in human greed. They had traded their morality for proximity to wealth, and now they were actively worshipping the thief who held the purse strings. Then Julian made his move. He wiped his sweating palms on his trousers and leaned awkwardly across the table. His body language was a masterclass in submission. He hunched his shoulders, making himself physically smaller, A stark contrast to the arrogant bully he had been just 5 minutes ago in the lobby. "Arthur, listen," Julian began, his voice strained with nervous desperation. "About the restructuring after the Apex buyout, we talked about the Vice President of Human Resources position. I just wanted to make sure we are still locked in for that. I have been putting in the groundwork, keeping everything quiet on my end, just like you asked." From my spot in the shadows Fissos, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I activated the camera, zoomed in slightly to frame the entire booth, and hit the red record button. The acoustics of the mahogany-paneled lounge carried their voices perfectly into my device. Arthur slowly lowered his champagne flute. The charming, victorious smile melted off his face, replaced by a look of profound, unfiltered disgust. He stared at my brother as if Julian were a cockroach that had just crawled onto his expensive leather shoe. "Julian," Arthur said, his tone flat and heavily laced with contempt. "You do not seriously think I'm going to make you a vice president at a $150 million tech firm, do you?" Julian froze, his face draining of color. "But we had an agreement. I helped you handle Thorn 4 years ago. I secured the hardware. I did exactly what you told me to do," Arthur scoffed, leaning back and spreading his arms across the booth. "You stole a research hard drive from your own sister because you were broke and desperate. That does not make you an executive, that makes you a liability. When Apex takes over tomorrow, I'm going to have real investors scrutinizing my organizational chart. I cannot have a useless, underqualified hack sitting in the so-white." Julian swallowed hard, looking frantically at our parents for support. "Mom, Dad, tell him we had a deal." I kept the camera steady, eager to capture my parents' defense of their golden boy. But the defense never came. Beatrice set her drink down and shot Julian a warning glare. "Julian, do not be greedy. Arthur is under a lot of pressure with this acquisition. You cannot expect him to just hand out executive titles." William nodded in rapid agreement, instantly siding with the money. "Listen to your mother, Julian. You are embarrassing yourself. Arthur has been more than generous to this family. You will take whatever position he finds appropriate." Julian looked absolutely gutted. His own parents had just thrown him under the bus without a second thought, sacrificing his dignity to keep Arthur happy. Arthur chuckled thoroughly, enjoying the complete subjugation of my family. "Tell you what, Mitch, because I am a generous guy, I will find a desk for you in the basement. You can manage the payroll for the janitorial staff, but you will take that desk, you will cash your modest paycheck, and you will keep your mouth completely shut about the past. Do we understand each other?" Julian looked down at his lap, thoroughly humiliated, and gave a slow, defeated nod. "Yes, I understand." I tapped the screen on my phone, saving the high-defin video directly to my secure cloud server. I had just recorded irrefutable, crystal-clear evidence of extortion, bribery, and complicity. Arthur had just admitted to paying my brother for stolen hardware, and my parents had fully endorsed the corruption. It was the exact financial and legal ammunition my corporate litigators needed to ensure none of them would ever see the outside of a federal courtroom. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, savoring the cold, heavy weight of the evidence. Before I could step away from the marble pillar, a sudden movement caught my eye. A figure detached itself from the crowded bar area and walked purposefully into the dimly lit alcove where I stood. It was Olivia. She stepped into the shadows beside me, standing shoulder to shoulder with me in the dark. She did not look at the booth, where her husband was currently drinking away his last shred of self-respect. She looked straight ahead. Her posture was rigid, and her knuckles were turning white from how tightly she was gripping her designer clutch purse against her chest. I did not turn my head to look at Olivia. In a room full of corporate sharks and desperate social climbers, 2 women having a quiet conversation in the shadows would instantly draw unwanted attention. We stood shoulder to shoulder, our eyes fixed firmly forward on the illuminated booth, where my brother was currently drowning his remaining pride in a glass of expensive champagne. "I cannot stomach another minute watching that man beg for his own dignity," Olivia said. Her voice was a low, steady murmur, pitched perfectly, so that only I could hear the absolute venom lacing her words. Olivia shifted her weight, the emerald silk of her tailored suit rustling softly against the marble pillar. I have spent 4 years married to a coward thorn. 4 years of listening to Julian scream at me behind closed doors to inflate his own pathetic ego, only to watch him gravel like a beaten dog the second Arthur snaps his fingers. I am entirely done with this marriage, and I am entirely done with the collective delusion keeping this toxic family afloat. I kept my gaze locked on the booth. Julian was now eagerly nodding along to whatever degrading instruction Arthur was barking at him. "You are a brilliant corporate auditor, Olivia," I replied smoothly, my tone conversational but layered with deep respect. "You always possess too much intellect and far too much class to remain chained to a sinking ship. I assumed you would formulate an exit strategy eventually. I just did not realize your timeline aligned so perfectly with mine." Olivia let out a breath that sounded remarkably like a bitter laugh. "Oh, my timeline accelerated the moment I found out what they actually did to you 4 years ago. Julian likes to drink when he feels inadequate, and when Julian drinks, he brags. He thought he was a criminal mastermind. He thought he was playing the corporate game, but he is sloppy Thorn. He is incredibly fatally sloppy." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Olivia unfasten the gold clasp of her designer clutch. She did not pull out a compact mirror or a tube of lipstick. She reached in with 2 fingers and extracted a small, heavy, encrypted titanium USB drive. She pressed her hand flat against the side of her leg, hiding the drive from the view of the open lounge. I casually lowered my left hand, allowing my fingers to brush against hers. The cold metal of the drive slid seamlessly from her palm into mine. I curled my fingers around it, slipping it instantly into the concealed interior pocket of my charcoal jacket. "Julian kept backups," Olivia whispered, delivering the fatal blow with the precision of a seasoned sniper. "Everything Arthur paid him to steal from your research hard drive 4 years ago is on that drive. The original source chemical compound, the time-stamped commit logs, and the proprietary machine learning models. The digital fingerprints are irrefutable. You can prove you are the sole architect of the entire platform." A surge of cold, calculating adrenaline flooded my veins. My family had burned my life to the ground on the assumption that I had zero proof of my intellectual property. They assumed the research hard drive Julian stole and handed over to Arthur was the only existing record of my work. They were fools, but that is not the best part. Olivia continued, her voice practically humming with lethal satisfaction. "Arthur has been using Julian to route unauthorized capital through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Arthur needed a proxy to sign the wire transfers so his own name would remain off the banking ledgers. He paid my husband a miserable sum to take on all the federal liability. Julian thought keeping a record of those transactions would give him leverage to negotiate his promotion. He was trying to blackmail a thief." I noted a sharp smile finally breaking across my face. "Exactly," Olivia said, "but Julian lacks the spine to actually pull the trigger. He gathered all the evidence of Arthur embezzling millions in research and development funds, and then he just sat on it, hoping Arthur would magically reward him out of the goodness of his heart. The drive in your pocket contains every single offshore account routing number, every falsified invoice, and a complete audit trail of the stolen venture capital. You are handing me the executioner's axe, Olivia." Olivia finally turned her head to look directly at me. Her dark eyes were blazing with a fierce, uncompromising fire. "Swing it hard, Thorn. I want to watch them burn. I want every single one of them to face the absolute ruin they deserve." I offered her a singular, profound nod. "Consider it done." A heavy resounding chime echoed through the sophisticated sound system of the VIP lounge, cutting our conversation short. The live jazz quartet immediately ceased playing. Across the room, the massive brass-studded mahogany doors of the grand ballroom swung open simultaneously. A wave of golden light and the swelling sound of a live orchestra flooded the lounge. "Ladies and gentlemen," a polished voice announced over the intercom. "The banquet is now beginning. Please make your way to the main ballroom for the evening's keynote presentation and dinner service. The lounge immediately buzzed with energetic movement. Tech executives, venture capitalists, and eager social climbers began funneling toward the glowing entrance. I watched as Arthur stood up from his booth, buttoning his velvet jacket with a look of supreme arrogant triumph. He offered his arm to Clara, who pined and adjusted her diamond necklace for the watching crowd. My parents and Julian scrambled out of the booth, right behind them, desperate to stay within the golden aura of Arthur's perceived wealth. As Arthur walked toward the ballroom doors, he pulled his phone from his pocket. He stared at the screen, his thumbs moving rapidly. A cruel, malicious smirk twisted his features. He hit send and shoved the phone back into his jacket, laughing to himself as he guided Clara into the grand hall. A second later, my phone vibrated intensely against my ribcage. I pulled it from my pocket and glanced at the illuminated screen. It was a notification from the family group chat. Arthur had just sent a message to William, Beatrice, Julian, and me. I tapped the screen. Opening the message thread, Arthur had written a masterpiece of pathetic arrogance. Look at the failure hiding in the shadows while we sit at the head table. Do not worry, Thorne. Once I sign this $150 million check on stage tonight, I am going to buy you a tent. I will have security escort you to the nearest homeless shelter before dessert is served. Enjoy the view from the cheap seats. Right below his message, 2 new notifications popped up instantly. William liked the message. Beatrice loved the message. I stared at the glowing screen. The absolute lack of basic human decency was no longer painful. It was just validation. Every shred of guilt I might have harbored about destroying their lives evaporated into the cold-conditioned air of the hotel. I locked my phone, tapping it lightly against the titanium drive hidden in my pocket. The trap was set, the evidence was secured, the prey was marching happily into the slaughterhouse. I stepped out from behind the marble pillar, my heels clicking sharply against the floor, as I walked toward the grand ballroom doors, ready to begin the execution. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom was a spectacle of corporate excess. Thousands of crystal prisms refracted the light above 50 circular tables draped in crisp white silk. Instead of descending onto the main floor to join the herd of venture capitalists and tech executives, I caught the eye of the head of security and gestured upward. He immediately unhooked a velvet rope, granting me access to the private mezzanine balcony. The elevated tier wrapped around the perimeter of the room, shrouded in darkness, and reserved strictly for technical staff and security overwatch. It was the perfect vantage point. I took a seat in a high-backed leather chair right at the balcony edge, completely veiled by the shadows, yet afforded a panoramic view of the slaughterhouse floor below. Directly in the center of the room sat Arthur. His table was positioned closest to the main stage, an undeniable mark of his supposed status as the guest of honor. He sat with his legs splayed wide, holding a glass of vintage champagne like a scepter. Clara was draped over his shoulder, performing her role as the adoring wife for anyone glancing their way. Beside them, my parents and Julian looked like lottery winners who had not yet realized their ticket was counterfeit. William was laughing loudly at a joke Arthur made, while Beatrice signaled a waiter to refill her glass. They were entirely intoxicated by the illusion of their own impending wealth. My phone vibrated against the sleek fabric of my slacks. I pulled it out and opened the family group chat. Arthur had just hit send on his promised message. Look at the failure hiding in the rafters. Once I sign this $150 million check on stage tonight, I am going to buy you a tent. I will have security escort you to the nearest homeless shelter before dessert is served. Enjoy the view from the cheap seats. Right below the block of text, 2 notifications appeared in rapid succession. William liked the message. Beatrice loved the message. I stared at the screen, observing the digital footprints of their cruelty. There was no pain left, only a sterile clinical confirmation that executing this takedown was absolutely necessary. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the small table next to me. I opened my briefcase and extracted a thin encrypted tablet, booting it up with a biometric scan. I retrieved the heavy titanium drive. Olivia had slipped into my hand and plugged it directly into the secure port. The decryption biotech platform ran for a fraction of a second before a massive directory of hidden folders populated my screen. Julian had indeed been sloppy, but Arthur had been criminally arrogant. I opened the primary ledger files, my eyes scanning the rows of financial data with the practiced efficiency of a veteran corporate auditor. The story the numbers told was far worse than simple intellectual property theft. Arthur had not just stolen my machine learning algorithm to secure his initial funding. He had been systematically bleeding the company dry for years. I pulled up the routing numbers and cross-referenced them with the offshore accounts Olivia had mentioned. It was blatant, undeniable, federal wire fraud. Arthur had been funneling millions of dollars from his research and development budget directly into shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He used that stolen capital to fund his lavish lifestyle, paying for Clara's luxury cars, extravagant vacations, and the massive diamond ring currently sitting on her finger. To mask the bleeding balance sheet, he had falsified revenue projections and forged user acquisition metrics. He was actively lying to his current investors and attempting to defraud Apex Biomed out of $150 million based on entirely fabricated financial health. I clicked open the signature logs. Julian had authorized every single one of those fraudulent offshore transfers. Arthur had used my brother as the ultimate fall guy, ensuring Julian's digital fingerprints were all over the embezzlement. If the federal authorities ever audited the company, Julian would be the one facing decades in a federal penitentiary, while Arthur walked away with clean hands. My parents had sold their soul to a man who was actively framing son for federal crimes. The sheer magnitude of their collective stupidity was staggering. I initiated a secure file transfer, uploading the entire contents of the drive directly to Apex Biomed, Internal Legal Department, and copying the Federal Fraud Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The data transmission completed with a scintillant glowing confirmation on my screen. The trap was locked. The guillotine was raised below me. The ambient noise of the ballroom began to shift. The live orchestra concluded their set with a final soaring chord that echoed off the vated ceiling. The main chandeliers dimmed slowly, casting the audience into a hushed, expectant twilight, while the brilliant stage lights flared to life. The moment had arrived. A hush fell over the room as Chairman Victor Sterling walked purposefully out from the wings and stepped up to the acrylic podium. The apex billionaire adjusted the microphone, his expression completely unreadable. Down at the center table, Arthur stood up. He buttoned his velvet suit jacket with a sharp, confident tug. His chest puffed out in absolute triumph. He flashed a brilliant, arrogant smile at Clara, completely ready to walk up those steps and claim his $150 million coronation. The sharp feedback of the microphone echoed through the cavernous ballroom, instantly commanding the attention of every single person in the room. Conversations halted. Champagne flutes were carefully placed onto silk tablecloths. Victor Sterling stood at the clear acrylic podium, looking out over the sea of tech elites, venture capitalists, and industry titans. His expression was a masterclass in corporate stoicism, betraying absolutely none of the carnage that was about to unfold. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor began, his deep, resonant voice filling the grand space. Welcome to a defining evening for Apex Biomed. In the world of venture capital, we are constantly searching for innovation. We look for disruptive technology, unparalleled vision, and most importantly, absolute integrity. Tonight we gathered here, under the assumption that we had found exactly that. We came here to formalize the acquisition of a company that promised to reshape the landscape of machine learning. Down at the center table, Arthur was practically glowing. He stood up, fully buttoning the center button of his custom velvet tech jacket, with a sharp, arrogant tug. He looked down at Clara, offering her a smug, victorious wink. Sydney beamed back at him, Zick raising her glass in a silent toast. My parents, William and Beatrice, were clapping enthusiastically, their faces flushed with the thrill of impending wealth. Julian sat beside them, cheering for the man who was actively framing him for federal crimes. The sheer delusion radiating from their table was almost palpable. Arthur did not wait to be officially called up. His ego demanded the spotlight. He stepped away from his table and began his triumphant march toward the main stage. He walked with the swagger of a conquering king, his chest puffed out, shoulders thrown back. He nodded to investors he passed, shaking a hand here, pointing a finger gun. There he was, soaking in the applause, basking in the admiration of hundreds of powerful people who believed he was a self-made genius. From my vantage point in the dark mezzanine, I watched his coronation walk with absolute icy detachment. He looked so incredibly small from up here, a tiny fragile man walking blindly into a steel trap. Victor watched Arthur approach the stage. The billionaire chairman did not smile. He simply waited as two impeccably dressed assistants walked out from the wings of the stage, carrying a massive oversized presentation check. The crisp, bold lettering on the board was impossible to miss. $150 million. The crowd erupted into a fresh wave of applause. Arthur reached the base of the stage stairs, taking the steps two at a time. He approached Victor, opening his arms wide, as if expecting the billionaire chairman to embrace him like an equal. Arthur reached out his manicured hands, extending to grasp the edge of the $150 million check. Then, the atmosphere in the ballroom fundamentally shifted. Victor Sterling did not hand over the check. Instead, his jaw tightened, his eyes grew cold and hard, stripping away the polite veneer of a gala host to reveal the ruthless corporate predator underneath. Victor gripped the top edge of the presentation board and deliberately forcefully lowered it until it rested on the stage floor, completely out of Arthur's reach. Arthur froze, his extended hands hovered awkwardly in the empty space between them. The confident, arrogant smile plastered across his face, fractured. He let out a nervous, breathy chuckle, looking around the stage, as if waiting for a punchline that was not coming. The applause in the ballroom died out rapidly, replaced by a sudden heavy silence. Hundreds of highly trained executives sensed the shift in the room's energy. Something was profoundly wrong. Victor leaned back into the microphone, his voice cut through the silent ballroom like a freshly sharpened blade. Before we finalize this acquisition, Victor announced, his tone entirely devoid of warmth. Apex Biomed must defer to our true majority shareholder. We do not finalize capital transfers of this magnitude without the direct authorization of the person who actually built this empire. Arthur shifted his weight, visibly sweating under the intense stage lights. Victor, sir, I am not sure I understand. Arthur stammered, his voice lacking the booming confidence he had wielded just moments ago in the lobby. We finalized the terms this morning. Victor ignored him completely. He did not even turn his head to acknowledge Arthur's presence. He kept his eyes locked on the crowd, his voice projecting absolute authority. The architect of our entire venture capital fund has a restructuring announcement. Victor continued, his words ringing out like a judge delivering a sentence. We will proceed under her direct orders. Arthur took a step back, his eyes darting frantically toward the Apex legal team seated near the front row. Down at the center table, Sydney lowered her champagne glass, the smug satisfaction draining from her face. Beatrice and William exchanged panicked glances, entirely unequipped to process a corporate disruption of this scale. Julian just stared at the stage, his mouth hanging slightly open. Who is he talking about? Arthur muttered under his breath, looking wildly around the stage. There is no other shareholder. I own the company. I have the papers. Victor stepped away from the podium. He raised his right hand and gave a sharp, definitive signal to the technical booth at the back of the hall. Instantly, the brilliant warm lights illuminating the main stage snapped off, plunging Arthur into absolute darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of executives. Arthur stumbled backward in the pitch black, his voice echoing in panic as he demanded someone turn the lights back on. A heavy mechanical click sounded from the lighting rig high above the ballroom floor. A single blindingly bright spotlight pierced through the darkness. It did not hit the stage. It did not hit the center table. The beam of pure white light swept across the vated ceiling and snapped directly up to the dark mezzanine balcony. The spotlight hit me dead center. I sat perfectly still in my high-backed leather chair, my legs elegantly crossed, my hands resting calmly on the armrests. The tailored charcoal suit absorbed the harsh light, making me look like a ghost that had just materialized to collect a debt. I looked down over the railing, staring directly into the terrified wide eyes of the man who had stolen my life. The silence in the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom was absolute. Thousands of attendees stopped breathing all at once. The live orchestra had long since lowered their instruments, and not a single crystal champagne flute clinked against the silk tablecloths. The sheer crushing weight of the silence was deafening. I stood up from my leather chair on the mezzanine, taking my time. I slowly smoothed the lapels of my unbranded charcoal suit, ensuring every line was perfectly crisp. The spotlight operator tracked my every move, keeping the blinding beam of pure white light pinned directly on me as I stepped out of the shadows and approached the sweeping marble staircase that connected the balcony to the main floor. My heels struck the marble steps. Click, click, click. The sound echoed through the cavernous space like a metronome, counting down the final seconds of Arthur's corporate life. The crowd below parted organically, stepping aside to create a wide, unobstructed path from the base of the stairs all the way to the main stage. Hundreds of powerful investors, venture capitalists, and tech elites stared in stunned fascination. They did not know my name yet, but they fluently spoke the universal language of absolute authority. They knew raw power when they saw it walking toward them. On the stage, Arthur's brain finally short-circuited. The delusion he had meticulously maintained for 4 years shattered under the oppressive weight of the spotlight. Panic consumed him entirely. He lunged forward, grabbing the microphone from the acrylic podium with shaking hands. His knuckles turned stark white as he gripped the metal stand. "Security!" Arthur screamed, his voice cracking violently over the massive sound system. "Get her out of here right now. She is a fired employee. She is a psychotic stalker. I want her arrested for trespassing." Down at the center table, Sydney clamped both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with mounting terror. The massive diamond ring on her finger caught the light, but she looked like a woman who had just realized she was standing on a landmine. My parents, William and Beatrice, remained frozen in their seats, utterly paralyzed by the sudden violent shift in their reality. Julian gripped the edge of the dining table, his face turning a sickly shade of gray, as he realized the man he had been begging for an executive job was currently having a very public, very unhinged meltdown. Only Olivia sat perfectly upright, a cool, deeply satisfied smile playing across her face. I did not alter my pace. I did not flinch at his shouting. I kept my gaze locked directly onto Arthur's sweating, desperate face. He was unraveling in front of the exact people he had spent months trying to impress. The billionaire investors in the front row exchanged deeply concerned glances. In the corporate world, emotional outbursts from a chief executive officer are a massive red flag. Arthur was bleeding credibility with every word he screamed. "Do your jobs!" Arthur shrieked, pointing wildly at the tactical security team positioned around the perimeter of the ballroom. "She is having another mental breakdown. She has been harassing my family. Throw her out on the street before she ruins this event." 4 heavy-set security guards immediately mobilized, marching briskly toward the front of the room. Their heavy boots thumped against the polished floor. Arthur let out a loud, breathy laugh of relief, falsely assuming the cavalry was coming to save his $150 million deal. He wiped the heavy layer of sweat from his forehead with the back of his velvet sleeve, frantically trying to compose his features and rebuild his shattered CEO persona for the watching crowd. But the guards did not look at me. They marched directly past my path, their eyes fixed firmly on the stage. I reached the bottom of the grand staircase, Chairman Victor Sterling walked purposefully down the steps from the stage to meet me on the ballroom floor. The billionaire titan did not ask me to stop. He did not question my presence. Instead, Victor extended his right hand toward me, offering his physical support with the utmost professional reverence. I accepted Victor's hand and stepped up onto the stage. The crowd watched in captivated silence as the chairman of Apex Biomed personally escorted me to the center of the platform. The visual hierarchy was undeniable. Victor was treating me with the exact level of deference a subordinate reserves for their absolute superior. Arthur stood by the podium, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He tried to speak to Victor, reaching his hand out in a desperate plea for an explanation. But before a single word could form on his lips, the 4 security guards stepped onto the stage. They did not move toward me. They marched directly up to Arthur. 2 guards flanked him on his left and 2 on his right. They crossed their massive arms, using their sheer physical bulk to force Arthur to take several stumbling steps backward. They effectively boxed him into a corner, completely isolating him away from the acrylic podium and the $150 million presentation check. Arthur looked at the guards, then at Victor, and finally at me. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, empty shell of a man. His chest heaved as he struggled to draw oxygen into his lungs. The reality of his situation had finally breached his impenetrable ego. He was not the guest of honor, he was the prey. I stepped up to the acrylic podium, taking my rightful place at the center of the stage. I looked down at the VIP table, making sure my parents, my brother, and Clara had a perfect, unobstructed view of my face. I wanted them to see exactly who held the executioner's axe. I reached out and tapped the microphone with my index finger. A sharp, clear thud resonated through the silent ballroom, demanding total submission from everyone in the room. I leaned forward, keeping my voice dangerously calm and entirely level. I was not fired, Arthur, I was preparing. 4 years ago, the man trembling in the corner of this stage told the world a very compelling story. My voice echoed through the massive ballroom, crisp and completely devoid of emotion. He told our investors that I was unstable. He told the board that I was a liability. He told my own parents that for this technology to survive, the actual creator needed to be excised like an infection. I looked down at the center table. William and Beatrice were staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes. Julian sat frozen beside them, his jaw practically resting on his chest. You all bought his narrative, because it was convenient. I continued, my gaze sweeping over the audience of elite venture capitalists and industry titans. You looked at a quiet, dedicated coder and decided she was expendable. You allowed a charismatic thief to forge separation agreements and strip away my founder equity. You thought that because I walked away without screaming, without causing a public spectacle, I had simply surrendered. You thought I crawled into a hole to disappear. I gripped the edges of the clear acrylic podium. I did not disappear, I adapted. Arthur strained against the 2 massive security guards blocking his path. He looked like a trapped animal, his custom velvet suit clinging to his profusely sweating frame. Thorne, shut your mouth, he hissed, his voice raspy and panicked. You have no idea what you are doing. You are ruining a $150 million acquisition. I am not ruining anything, Arthur, I replied smoothly. I'm executing an audit. A murmur of confusion rippled through the front rows of the audience. Wealthy executives shifted in their seats, exchanging wary glances. Victor Sterling stood perfectly still at the edge of the stage, his hands clasped behind his back, watching me work with absolute unwavering respect. You spent the last 4 years chasing venture capital. Arthur, I announced, projecting my voice so every single person in the grand hall could hear the undeniable truth. You courted major investors, hosted extravagant dinners, and begged for constant cash injections to keep your stolen ship afloat, because you had absolutely no idea how to update or maintain the core algorithm I wrote.